So I was invited by the curator Alice Motard to show the work Back to the Fields, which is a project that I first conceived in 2015 for a space in London called Camden Arts Centre. And the way I work normally is to really make quite site-specific projects that are also like time-specific. So I was really looking a lot at the history of the building. Camden Arts Centre is in what used to be a public library. I was asked to reconfigure this installation Back to the Fields. I'd shown it first in Camden Arts Centre, secondly in 2016 as part of the Sao Paulo Biennial. And it has to be completely reconfigured each time. It's very complicated work to show. And so when Alice initially asked me to show it, I told her that after last time I had sworn not to do it again. And I explained why, because it's so complicated, so many objects, but also because it contains so much living material. And I think it's really easy to underestimate how difficult it is to show plants in a museum setting. So being pretty determined to do it, we figured out a way, and it has involved a really special collaboration with the Botanic Gardens here. And they helped us devise a sort of rotation system where the plants move from the nave. We have 3 of everything, and they move into the light to get the essential food that they need from the sun. And so there's this circular kind of rotation for the plants. So the installation is based on the French Republican calendar, and it was the official time system of France and the French colonies for 12 and a half years. And it completely stripped the Gregorian calendar of all its religious reference points. So removing the saints' days, removing all religious celebrations. So it really came from this sort of crisis of representation, and it really conceived a secular framework of representation. And to their minds, to the devisers of the calendar's minds, the representation involved things that were not only specific to the time and the place, but also items that they considered to be transhistoric. So the reference points for that were things from the natural world, so plants, useful things. It also celebrated the life of agricultural workers. The calendar revolves around 12 months, which are 30 days in length, and they're renamed in collaboration with a poet of very beautiful names, and the week becomes 10 days long. The 5th day of the week is always named after an animal. The 10th day is named after an agricultural tool or useful object. Ironically, that's the day of rest, but it's named after the work thing. And that's possibly one of the reasons that the calendar failed, actually, because workers were essentially getting less time off, and they had a much longer working week. And the calendar really references the seasonality and the weather through the names like première, première, nivos. It references the climate of France at that moment in the year, but also includes the materials that are very pertinent to the time. So the months are 30 days long, so 12 months of 30 make 360. So obviously at the end of the year, you have 5 or 6 in leap year leftover days. So these became festival days called the Saint-Clotildes, and each of those days were named after an idea rather than a physical thing. They named labour, talent, virtue, conviction, honour, and revolution, which is the leap year day, the 366th day of the year every 4 years. So the idea here was really to show Back to the Fields, but to also show the decimal clock, which we kind of framed under the Saint-Clotilde labour, and we used it to reference where the clock would have been in the building when this was a warehouse for grain and commercial goods. So it's in the same position as where the workers would have been looking for the sort of framework for their working day. And then I conceived the 5 other new works. I mean, one of them is actually borrowed, and framed them around the idea of the Saint-Clotilde. So a lot of the works in the exhibition reference the idea of cycles and continuity. So there's this sort of emblem of the circle that's there in the chairs, in the clock, in Mrs. Calendar, in the Republican calendar, and in the plants themselves. And I wanted to really reference that idea in the title too. So that was why I chose the title, It Rains, It Rains, was to reference the idea of the water cycle and the rain as the essential kind of giver of life to the plants and to nature, but also refer to a sort of coming storm, which is, so the words It Rains comes from the song that was written by one of the devisers of the calendar, Faber d'Eglantine, and the song has 3 different names. It was known as The Storm, and also Back to the Fields, and also It Rains, Shepherdess. And it addresses Marie Antoinette playing dressed as a shepherdess in the gardens of Versailles. So my interest in the calendar is very, very layered. So I really came at it from a historic perspective. When I first started looking at it, I felt like it was something that was a sort of quirk or almost like a footnote to history. It's often referenced as a sort of odd thing. And I wanted to look more closely at it. And I've come to find some very sort of deep belief in it, actually. And having shown it a few times before, I've had a lot of people have been quite affected by it and found that I'm meeting someone in Brazil who really didn't speak any English at all, and we couldn't really communicate. And it's an older man, but he managed to say to me, like, this is the calendar I live by. This is my life. He's had this kind of belief in nature. That was his God, if you will. I think, the interest came historically, first of all, but then as an artist, I work with materials. I'm not an academic. And when I first showed the Back to the Fields project, my daughter was 2 years old, and she was at the stage in life where she was just, picking up little things on the street and looking at shells and handling, having first encounters with the materials of our world. And I think that really affected how I was thinking about it and wanted to create something that was very tangible and very clear and very open and very low down. So with a lot of the work that I make, I really want it to be open to all audiences, and I'd like there to be an entry point for children into the work as well, so they can have very kind of basic encounters with it and ask questions of it. But I hope people might be able to enter it at different points, whether they're familiar with the history or not.